Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and yesterday we made our video on the best decks to play for ranked mode in this early new season with Eevee Grove coming out. This video is going to be kind of an extension for that. I know a lot of people were wondering about some of the new decks that weren't on our list yesterday. That's what this video today is all about. Talking about all of the other new decks that I guess maybe just didn't make the cut. I didn't assume that they were really some of the best decks to be playing for ranked mode, but they are definitely really strong, really competitive decks. That's what we're going to be going over today. One thing, of course, to note is that things are going to change in the metagame as time goes on. Some decks that, of course, I did mention in yesterday's video as the best decks for ranked might end up being some of the best decks for ranked. You really just don't know how the metagame is going to develop. A lot of really strong cards came out in this particular mini set in Eevee Grove, so we're going to go ahead and showcase a bunch of other decks that are really strong utilizing all of the new cards. Let's get right into it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The first one here is going to be Primarina. So I think that Primarina is a really strong card, and it can utilize this new How supporter that we also got in Eevee Grove. How is really strong. It's a bit random that we got this particular supporter card that buffs things like Primarina EX, Incineroar EX, Decidueye EX. Incineroar and Decidueye were all really strong cards, and they were strong decks in their own right. Now we have Primarina EX. They can all utilize this new House supporter card to boost their damage. Primarina is really interesting. It's got 2 attacks. It has a single energy attack that does deal quite a bit of damage, and it actually deals even more damage when you have 2 energy. So regardless of whether you have 1 energy, 2 energy, or of course 3 energies on Primarina, we can all we can attack for each one of those different sort of energy metrics and deal increased damage depending on how much energy is on Primarina. So Hydro Pump for 1 energy does 40 damage. If you have 2 energies on Primarina, Hydro Pump does 80 damage, and then we have Sparkling Area, which does 100 damage, and then it heals 30 damage, I believe, from Primarina, which is pretty impressive considering we have a lot of healing cards in the format. It is a stage 2 Pokemon, so in this deck we're playing Lily. That's a lot of healing. You can pair this with the small Primarina, so theoretically speaking, we could have the non-EX Primarina on our bench to heal even more additional damage from Primarina EX. We have Misties to generate additional energies. We have Leftovers, which does pair quite well with Primarina. I think that Leftovers is a little bit better than things like Giant Cape in a deck like this, so Primarina is really tanky. It's definitely more on the defensive side of things between Decidueye and Incineroar, but it is certainly really strong. There's a lot of fire running around in the format, so being able to hit for weakness on a lot of those fire-type Pokemon that are seeing play, things like Incineroar, things like Charizard, things like Flareon. The cool thing about Primarina EX is that because it's a single energy attack and it does deal 40 damage, and we also have How, we can actually get a KO on basically any basic Pokemon that might be in our opponent's active spot, other than things like Type Null, which is definitely really impressive. And by basic Pokemon, I mean those Pokemon that you're going to evolve with Rare Candy. Let's just say we are going against a Charizard deck or an Incineroar deck. If we get that attack off first, if we're going first, we can go ahead, Rare Candy into Primarina, hit for 40, but with weakness, that will be taking the KO on your opponent's Charmander or their Litten, and that is certainly really strong. Primarina in general is just a really good Pokemon. It hasn't necessarily caught on too much already, but I do think a lot of people don't have all of the new cards yet, and also I don't think everybody knows exactly the best way to play Primarina just yet. There's a lot of different aspects of this deck that we can kind of utilize. I've seen people play Silvally with Primarina, which I guess is kind of obvious, and I've seen people play even the Greninja line with Primarina, but this deck list here is just playing Mewtwo, which is a really underrated leadoff Pokemon. It's going to be just kind of a buffer, and Primarina doesn't do like a ton of damage, so the extra damage that Mewtwo can go ahead and do in the early game can kind of make up for that damage that Primarina really lacks in the late game. And I think that's really the only downside to Primarina, is that sometimes these stage 2 decks are playing things like Giant Cape and they're playing Lily, so doing 100 damage technically isn't always enough to take a 2-hit KO. I think that's really the only downside to Primarina, and it does feel quite bad when you bring it in and you're not able to take a KO. Of course, Decidueye also kind of has that problem, but at least we can damage the bench, and then of course Incineroar can do quite a bit of damage. So Primarina is in a little bit of an awkward position. I just don't know if we have the perfect partner Pokemon to pair with Primarina, but it certainly is a very strong Pokemon, tons of healing. We have How, we have Misties, just honestly a really strong new Pokemon that I think is probably going to end up being somewhat relevant as time goes on. And I know that I just said that Primarina doesn't do that much damage, but we do have How to extend a little bit and take some damage, take some KOs where we maybe wouldn't be able to before. So here's Primarina. just an example of a Primarina deck, which I think, probably will be really strong. It's just one of those things where it's tough to kind of, come into a new metagame and then, find a spot, because unless one of the new cards or the new decks is specifically really good against a deck that already was seeing play previously in the previous format, it's just tough for decks like that to really find a place. Or Choreo is probably going to rise in play. If you play on the ranked ladder right now, it's almost exclusively Silvally, Rampardos, and Solgaleo, mainly because those are two very simple decks to play, but also decks that people probably already have the cards for. So keep that in mind. Primarinas might, it might struggle against some of the more popular decks currently in the metagame, but definitely not a bad deck whatsoever. Next up, we've got a Snorlax deck. So we have two different Snorlax decks to take a look at today. I think that Snorlax EX is actually very underrated, mainly because we have this new tool card Leftovers, which is going to increase the healing that Snorlax does every turn, but we also have Ilima, and Ilima, I believe is how you pronounce this particular supporter card, is broken with Snorlax. Snorlax with 160 HP is living an attack from basically everything in the game. It's really, really tanky. Snorlax can function as a pretty decent ramp attacker. The most common ways that I've seen people play Snorlax are either with Giratina EX or maybe with Arceus. We'll take a look at an Arceus deck and maybe in a later video, but we have a couple of different, Snorlax Giratina versions to take a look at today. My personally favorite way to play Snorlax, it kind of can act as two different things, right? When you're playing Giratina EX, oftentimes you're kind of just sitting back and you're broken space bellowing for a few turns. Think about Giratina and Darkrai. The upside to Giratina and Darkrai is that you can ramp up both Darkrai and Giratina at the same time, and they're both providing value. Snorlax really just kind of takes the place of something like Darkrai in this particular list here. We can actually just kind of keep a Snorlax in the active spot, and then if it does take a lot of damage, we can play Ilima and we can kind of bring it back up into our hand. Or if Giratina is in the active spot, this deck list here, by the way, is probably playing Water and Psychic Energies. So we can kind of just double up on a Giratina, or we can split the damage between Greninja and Giratina. It really just acts kind of as a buffer, and if Snorlax is on the bench, we can just attach one to Snorlax and then Broken Space Bellow every turn and build up both a Snorlax EX and a Giratina. This list here is playing Greninja, so there are some variants where Giratina and Greninja like to go together for sure. So this is kind of a hybrid between something like that Sylveon deck that's playing Giratina and Greninja, and of course just like a Giratina and Darkrai double ramp deck with Snorlax. I think that there's a couple of different really strong ways that we can utilize Snorlax. It hasn't necessarily seen a ton of play in early competitive tournament play, but it's not something to be underrated. It has a ton of HP. 130 is a decent amount of damage as well. And then, of course, you do fall asleep after you attack, but most of the time, that's not that big of a deal. We are playing one Pokemon Center Lady in this deck, and of course, whenever you attack on your turn and you fall asleep, technically you get 2 coin flip chances to wake up from that sleep, right? Because you attack, you flip a coin at the end of your turn, and then at the beginning of your next turn, you flip another coin. So you really have a pretty significant chance to wake up, but we do have Pokemon Center Lady if that does happen. I think Snorlax is very underrated. It is a little bit awkward for sure, but I think the main core aspect of Snorlax is that it's kind of just a massive wall, really hard to get around, and then of course we can literally just scoop it up and put it back into our hand, effectively full healing it, which I think is really broken. I think we're going to see some strategies that definitely utilize this particular combination of the Ilima supporter card and Snorlax, because I do think that it is kind of broken. But anyway, here's one particular version of Snorlax, and like I said, playing Psychic Energies and Water Energies in this deck here with Irida. Primarina, of course, is playing Water Energies. Obviously, there's no other energy you could be running in that deck. But yeah, here it is. The Giratina Greninja combo is still broken. It's seeing a lot of play in the Sylveon deck for sure, which we talked about yesterday. But this is definitely still a really strong combination and a really strong archetype. There is one more Snorlax deck that we'll take a look at, and this is going to be a little bit more in line with just kind of a basic Giratina and Darkrai deck. Playing 2 Giratina, 2 Snorlax, and then one of the small Snorlax. That's mainly here, probably for Oricorio. However, we are playing 1 copy of Berry, so we can utilize it as its own attacking option, which I think is pretty cool. But the same kind of stuff applies here. We're playing 3 different Snorlaxes, which are all really high HP, colorless Pokemon that all work well with Ilima, and we're playing 2 copies of Ilima. So the whole idea with this deck literally is that we want to park a Snorlax in the active spot. This deck is playing pure Psychic Energies, which does give it an advantage because theoretically we can double up on Giratina to attack a little bit more early. But yeah, we want to park 1 Snorlax in the active spot, and then potentially bench a second Snorlax, and then we can kind of split our energies between Giratina and Snorlax every turn. Whenever Snorlax is about to go down, we scoop it up with Ilima, and now we have both a Giratina and a Snorlax, both set up for our opponent to have to go through. Giratina EX has 150 HP on top of Snorlax's 160. They're both hitting for 130 damage, so it's going to be difficult. If the correct sort of line happens, if the correct sequence happens for this particular deck, it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to have to go through both Giratina and Snorlax. 130 is not a small amount of HP, I will tell you that. We are playing 2 Rocky Helmet in this list and 1 Leftovers. You could, of course, change out these cards however you kind of see fit. 1 Berry. I don't necessarily know if Berry's really needed that much. Theoretically speaking, if we're going up against an Oricorio deck, we can probably kind of take some extra time and just, you know, stall for a couple of turns and just attach to the small Snorlax without having to really worry, you know, about, you know, Berry to get that reduced attack cost. However, since we are playing this small Snorlax, Berry will work with it. One thing to mention, of course, is that Berry does not work with Snorlax EX. Technically, they have different names. So this particular Berry card is only for the non-EX Snorlax. But either way, this deck is really strong. 2 copies of Leaf, that's for the scenarios where we lead with Giratina. We would like to retreat out and go into our Snorlax for free because Giratina, of course, we can't scoop it up back into our hand and full heal it. So that's the only little awkward part about this deck is that if we don't get a second Snorlax out, we are a little bit entirely reliant on Giratina. But theoretically speaking, we could still attach to the active Snorlax and then Broken Space Bellow and hope that our Snorlax can live. We're not playing any Pokemon Center Lady for this deck list here, but you know, we could swap out things like Guzma or this Berry or one of the Rocky Helmets for Pokemon Center Ladies. Not only is it going to allow Snorlax to live a little bit longer, but it is, of course, going to reduce or remove, rather, that sleep effect that Snorlax might put on itself after it attacks. So, again, a pretty underrated card. I wanted to showcase Snorlax. There are a couple of ways that people are playing it. Like I said, pairing it with Arceus and that Dark Arceus combination seems to be fairly good as well. But yeah, I like Snorlax a lot, and I think that it's kind of underrated, so I wanted to showcase it a little bit in this video. The thing about Snorlax is, like, it just hasn't seen that much play, so it's hard to have a ton of data, or I guess proof in my testing. It seems quite strong, I'm not gonna lie, but again, proof of concept hasn't really caught on yet. Similar to kind of Primarina, so it's tough to really say how strong these particular decks will be in the metagame, but they are really strong, and they are new cards, so I wanted to go ahead and mention them in today's video. My light just turned off, so my my camera is going to look a little bit different. Anyway, okay. Next up here, we have a different version of Dragonite EX. I did cover it in yesterday's video. That was pairing it with Oricorio. Unfortunately, like I said, the ranked ladder is almost entirely Rampardos. So playing things like Oricorio probably isn't as, you know, smart or as safe as it was before. So this is going to be just a different flavor of Dragonite that is utilizing Zero Aura still. We are still using Electrical Cord mainly. That is kind of the core combo here of the deck list. And then, of course, we're playing 2 copies of Leaf and 2 copies of Dome Fossil. So the whole idea here is that we're going to be able to double pivot effectively with Dragonite, playing Leaf to retreat out for free, go into Dome Fossil, discard Dome Fossil to effectively double pivot and go back into Dragonite so that we can Giga Impact multiple turns in a row. This seems to be the more common way people are playing Dragonite. I do think that Oricorio is definitely a great partner for Dragonite, but again, unfortunately, in the current meta climate, tons of Silvally Rampardos. So Oricorio probably isn't a super safe bet if you're looking to compete, I guess, or climb the rank ladder. So this seems to be a very common way people are playing Dragonite. You could play still copies of Dawn, which I think could be pretty good. We have 2 Rare Candy, of course, 2 Pokeball. 1 Giant Cape, I think, is kind of needed sometimes, even with the high HP of Dragonite. Sometimes you can get 2 it KO'd pretty easily. 1 copy of Lily, I think, is also correct. And then 2 Research. So the Leaf Fossil combination, you could play any Fossil for this particular combo, of course. But yeah, I think Dragonite, again, also kind of underrated. I did see that one of the top players, one of literally the highest ranked players in ranked battles right now, has been playing Dragonite, which is definitely really cool. So I wanted to showcase, you know, a different version of Dragonite that was utilizing this more common strategy with the Fossils and with Leaf to get that Giga Impact out multiple times in a row. It is kind of this deck that's like a checkmate deck, right? If we do get Dragonite ready and set up, we bring it in, we attack for 180. Being able to play our Leaf card and then our Dome Fossil and then come back in, we will be taking 2 hit KOs. So the only really matchup where I think Dragonite might struggle in is going to be those strong hitting single prize archetypes, things like Silvally Rampardos, which is definitely really common, but Dragonite definitely has a place in the metagame, and I think it'll probably be really dominant at one point or another. We just have to wait and see exactly when that's going to be. Tons of new cards and also tons of old cards that are still seeing play. I think the metagame right now is very diverse. It's very wide open, but I think it's going to evolve and change a ton as the weeks go so on. I really cannot wait for the competitions this weekend for us to kind of analyze the results. And then, of course, we're going to have our Meta Monday, and then we'll do our tier list on Tuesday. Tomorrow, what I might do, and I know today we're talking about a bunch of new deck lists. Tomorrow, what I might do is showcase a bunch of like updated older decks and really kind of, I guess, bring to light, you know, a lot of the older cards that are still seeing a lot of play and just sort of new versions of decks, which is definitely exciting still. So that'll probably be tomorrow's video. Today, these are all just kind of new decks focused around the new Pokemon. Next up, guys, is the shameless plug, of course. Here it is. So 68.9% of you guys are not subscribed. Of course, we talked about it yesterday. It's literally free to subscribe. It's not a big deal if you don't, but again, you know, it supports me, it supports the channel. I really appreciate it, guys. A lot of you people just sort of watch my videos all of the time, but aren't subscribed. And again, you know, it is free. It doesn't, you know, hurt anything to hit that subscribe button. So go ahead, look down, check to see if you're subscribed. If you're not, I would definitely recommend that you hit that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. Okay. All right. Next up, we've got Flareon and Sylveon put together. What is this? This is crazy. This list actually did quite well at a couple of recent tournaments. And to be fair, I think that the Eevee line has a lot of potential to play these sort of multi-energy, kind of multi-evolution decks. Sylveon is a card that you could really pair with any deck just because it draws cards and it makes your deck a little bit more consistent. We've seen Sylveon in a million different ways. So here's Flareon and Sylveon put together. This deck list, I believe, is both playing fire and psychic energies. The upside to playing this particular list is that we can attack with both Sylveon and Flareon pretty consistently. We also have the Flamethrower Flareon, which can attack for 1 fire energies and 2 fire and 2 colorless, which is definitely quite strong. You could just play fire energies for this deck and it would be totally fine. But Sylveon EX definitely going to be a bit of a liability, not being able to attack with it. So I don't know exactly what the most common way or energy lineup is for this deck. You could play both, or you could just play straight fire. I think both are probably quite fine. You know, you really just have to kind of test it and try. I don't know exactly, like, the player who placed well at a tournament playing this deck was playing Psychic and Fire Energy, and I'd have to think about it. Probably just Fire now that I realize it, just because there's probably not a lot of benefit to playing both energies. Flareon definitely pulls Fire Energies out of the discard pile, so you would rather not get stuck playing a deck that is, you know, not getting Fire Energies in the zone. So you could play Dual, but I think it's probably better to just play Fire, to be honest with you. It's hard to know. There's no way to really know what the player competing with this deck was playing. They doesn't showcase it like on the Limitless platform. So yeah, let's just go with probably just Fire right now would be my recommendation. You could play both. But anyway, Flareon EX is just a really cool card and it's really strong. So the whole idea with this list is that we go Flareon EX into Flareon EX, or, you know, the normal Flareon into Flareon EX. Both of them are going to be quite decent. Flareon EX is a Pokemon that is really strong. Again, it's tough because there's so many Fire-type Pokemon in the format. We talked about it yesterday. I think there's a lot of ways we can play Flareon. We can play Turtonator. We can play Torkoal, the new Torkoal. You could play it with Silvally, and as we see here, playing it with Sylveon. There's also the new Flareon and the old one, like I said here, with Flamethrower. So there's a lot of different iterations of Flareon in which we can play it. This list I thought was really cool because it incorporated both Sylveon and Flareon. So again, I wanted to showcase it. We have Eevee Bag. We can heal the damage from Flareon EX, or we can increase the damage. We have Red. We have Guzma to knock off those giant capes. We even have Marza and Sabrina, of course, as well. I like Flareon. I really do. I think it's a really strong card. It really just comes down to what the better fire option is, and we have a lot of strong fire-type Pokemon already. Charizard is still Charizard, and in fact, Sylveon is another Pokemon that pairs well with Charizard. That's another deck list that has been doing well recently, so keep your eye out on Charizard decks that are going to be both utilizing Sylveon or maybe just Silvally like they were previously. Charizard's still around, very common, and then Incineroar is still seeing a lot of play because of the new house supporter, so it's tough. We definitely have our, you know, we're split a bunch of different ways as far as the fire archetypes go. They're all pretty strong, and I think Flareon is a little bit more of like a tempo-based attacker. It's definitely very consistent as opposed to things like Incineroar and Charizard, but consistency isn't always the #1 thing in this format. A lot of people are playing a bit more high roll decks that are, you know, a little bit more, you know, focused on RNG and getting that rare candy combo out, because to be fair, it's just really strong when you do that. So anyway, Flareon EX, here it is. This one is with Sylveon. I thought this was a pretty cool list, so I wanted to showcase it. It does incorporate all of the new cards, so definitely a unique way to be playing Flareon EX. Next up, guys, we've got, of course, the Sylveon deck that we, a very similar Sylveon deck to what we showcased, you know, on day one, which was, I think, one of the strongest new decks in the game. Unfortunately, though, I do think that most of the best ways to play Sylveon have ended up being just with some of the older cards. So this particular set is interesting because a lot of the top decks are incorporating a lot of the new cards, but they're not necessarily, centered around the new cards. And Sylveon definitely is a great enabler, but it does struggle a bit in terms of its damage output, which I think is a big reason why a lot of people are choosing to play Sylveon with that Giratina and Greninja package like we've seen previously. However, you can play Sylveon like we did in the video a couple of days ago with the Espeon and Sylveon cards that are not EX Pokemon. Sylveon does a ton of damage, and Espeon has the potential to deal a lot of damage as well. This is a deck that's going to be very consistent, very, very fast-paced, but unfortunately, it will be lacking a little bit in damage. We are playing 4 evolution Pokemon and 4 basic Pokemon. 4 of those are Eevees, and then every Pokemon evolves from an Eevee, which again makes this deck extremely consistent. We can fill up our bench with evolution Pokemon, hit hard with Sylveon. If our opponent is stacking up energies, we can bring in Espeon. We can hit 100 damage on a Charizard, or we can do 80 or 100 damage against like a Giratina Darkrai. So this deck list does function quite well. It has been performing somewhat well in tournaments, but again, I think that the Giratina Greninja version will end up being favored just because Giratina and Greninja is so strong. That's just sort of how the game goes, like it's hard to kind of knock Giratina off its pedestal, an incredibly strong Pokemon. But anyway, this is going to be a very similar list. I pulled this from a tournament where somebody was playing recently and did well. It's a little bit different than the deck that we were playing a couple of days ago, but very similar in terms of how it functions. I think that pure, psychic type Eevee decks are still good, but again, we have to compete with Giratina, and that certainly is pretty tough. But anyway, here it is. 2 Professor's Research, 1 Mars, 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus. So plenty of room, honestly, even with all of the Pokemon, to be playing tons of different trainer cards. Again, 2 Research, 2 Pokeball, 2 Sylveon, drawing through our deck really, really quickly. We can boost our damage with Eevee Bag. We have a Giant Cape to extend our HP so that we live an attack from Solgaleo, which is also incredibly common in this format right now. One of the main reasons why I think Sylveon seems like a little bit of a liability, if we are playing Sylveon EX, it's not something we really want in the active spot all that often. It will be fairly easy for our opponent to KO it, especially with Solgaleo hitting for weakness, but with Giant Cape, we're getting out of range of Solgaleo, we're getting out of range of things like Charizard, so I would say that Giant Cape is kind of needed in Sylveon decks, but to be fair, I think the proof is in the pudding, and Sylveon has seen a ton of play and a ton of success early on in the format in a variety of different decks. It's just really, really strong. Being able to play 2 Sylveon and Research in 1 turn and draw 6 cards is absolutely ridiculous. There's no way around it. Card advantage is always really important. Whenever you're ahead on card advantage, you're going to have a massive advantage. Solgaleo has taken advantage of this ever since it incorporated Shiinotic into its deck, and I think that Sylveon kind of does a very similar thing. So I like this deck list. I do. It's very consistent, very fast, but unfortunately does lack a little bit of damage output that we kind of need because a lot of people are still playing these rare candy decks. But anyway, here it is. We've already talked about this deck a little bit, just a different version. No Giratina in here. Instead, we're playing Espeon. Still a strong deck. I still really like this list, and I think it definitely is one of the stronger brand new decks to come from Eevee Grove. Next up, we have Darkrai and then Umbreon. So yes, we are talking about Umbreon. I was pretty not high on Umbreon, and to be fair, I still don't think Umbreon is nearly as good as some of the other cards that came out in Eevee Grove. However, as far as all of the new decks go, Umbreon is seeing a little bit of play and has seen at least a little bit of success. I wouldn't quantify this as like a really strong meta contender, but it does have potential, and it is actually a really strong deck in a variety of different matchups. Umbreon does do 40 damage, which, isn't crazy, but it does lock basic Pokemon into the active spot. They cannot retreat, which is good, right? But unfortunately, that 40 damage just doesn't really add up to much. Most decks right now like to sit back, they like to evolve, and then they like to attack you. Things like Silvally, things like Rampardos, Galeo. Umbreon, to be fair, I wouldn't choose to play it right now in the metagame, but on paper, this is not a bad deck whatsoever, especially if we are going first. We can evolve and then attack on our first turn with Umbreon, and then continue to attach to Darkrai from then on out, which is definitely pretty cool. Plus the Poison Bar, plus Nihilego, we're doing a lot of extra damage. So forcing your opponent to go through an Umbreon or 2 and then have to go through Darkrai EX can be kind of tricky for sure. Again, we're stopping them from attacking with basic Pokemon, which is going to be relevant in a variety of different scenarios. And then Darkrai EX in general is a fairly strong attacking Pokemon in its own right. So I like this list. I think there's some really great synergy here. I just don't know if the current format, at least in the ranked mode right now, is very kind to a deck like this. So again, be wary. I think this deck list is totally fine. It's going to be good, really good in some specific matchups, but is going to struggle pretty heavily in others. So that's definitely something I wanted to mention. Playing in the list like this is actually quite good against a Giratina and Darkrai, which is quite interesting. We are hitting for weakness on Giratina, plus the damage from Darkrai, and then plus the poison. It does add up, for sure. But again, a lot of the most common decks that are seeing play are evolution decks, and Umbreon just really kind of can't compete very well with him. It is what it is. I wanted to showcase it because, you know, a lot of people were, you know, fairly high on Umbreon before the set came out. They thought it would be really good. I didn't think it would be that good personally, but again, I wanted to showcase it. It is a new deck. These are new cards. It's a new strategy. So this seems to be kind of the best way that people are playing Umbreon right now, and I think it is quite good, honestly. I don't think it's very well positioned. I don't think it's like the best deck in the game, but it is at least, you know, able to win games, you know, which is what it comes down to. This is why decks like this don't make our yesterday's video with our best decks for ranked mode. But, you know, they are, you know, still worth mentioning, which is why we're kind of making a video like this today. Comment down below what you think of all of the new cards and all of the decks that are included in this video. Whenever the new set comes out, a bunch of new strategies and decks come out. Some, you know, rise to the top, some don't, but they are really all fun to try out. And I know it's not all about, you know, winning games and, you know, being Sylveon Rampardos every game, right? But, you know, sometimes it's fun to just kind of, you know, see what cards are seeing play, what the best way to play certain cards are. And I do think this is probably the best way to play Umbreon. I would love to hear your opinions about it down in the comment section below. But anyway, there we go. Yeah, I don't really have much else to say. There's Umbreon. Lastly, we've got Sweets, the Sweets deck. This one's pretty funny. You know, as far as the new archetypes go, this one has ended up being perhaps one of the most relevant and competitively viable decks, which is very interesting. I have seen a list exactly like this, but instead of like 2 of these trainer cards, they're actually just playing 2 Oricorios. So you can play this kind of Sweets archetype, but then, of course, in matchups where Oricorio is relevant, you can just play 2 Oricorio and then potentially just win games that way. So keep that in mind. Oricorio is a deck and a card that actually fits quite well into the Sweets archetype, but that aside, Sweets is not terrible whatsoever. Slurpuff was a card that we hadn't seen before previously in the trailer. We had seen Swirlix, we'd seen Milcery, and we had seen Alchemy, but we had not seen Slurpuff, and Slurpuff is quite strong. It takes 2 energies to attack, but again, if we attack with Swirlix and then we can evolve into Slurpuff, I believe that's 2 energies and we do 90 damage. We also have 120 HP, which is a lot, right? With Giant Cape, it's 140 on a stage 1 Pokemon. It's quite relevant. It's a lot of damage. And then we can kind of finish off the game and then go into Alchemy. The other thing to mention is that Slurpuff, its attack is actually Sweets Relay, which boosts the damage from Sweets Overload. This is going to be our final attacking option here. So the line for this deck, basically, is that we want to go like Swirlix into Slurpuff, and then hopefully into another Slurpuff, and then into Alcremie. You're just kind of hoping that you don't face down a Silvally deck going second, because, you know, then they're just going to start KOing all of your Pokemon by like turn 2. And that's really the only downside to playing, I think, a deck like this in the format, or at least one of the downsides to playing a deck like this. Alcremie can 1-hit KO basically any Pokemon in the game. So if we're able to take an early KO with the Swirlix Slurpuff leadoff, then we're in kind of a decent position. The other unfortunate aspect of this is that sometimes we do lead with Milcery. It only has 50 HP. We are weak to Metal. That's not really super relevant, but even with Giant Cape, Slurpuff will be getting KO'd by Solgaleo. And if you lead with Milcery, then of course, you kind of have to retreat because you want to keep Alchemy till the end, or we have to just stay in and then bench a second Milcery and then evolve that one. So it can be a little bit awkward, but to be fair, this deck does way more damage than I ever expected it to. We are playing wider energies for this deck because we are playing 2 copies of Irida. That healing will come in handy, especially against Oricorio, and, you know, in a variety of different scenarios. Like, we can heal the damage from type Null off of our Swirlix, right? The 20 or 40 damage that we deal, and then we can evolve into Slurpuff and theoretically still live an attack from Silvally. And I think that's really, really important. So the Giant Cape, Irida combination with Slurpuff is really relevant. And like I said, I really think Slurpuff is probably one of the more significant aspects of this deck. It's just not something that we had seen previously, but does actually kind of put this deck over the top and actually makes it somewhat competitively viable. In tournaments over the last couple of days, this has been actually one of the more successful new decks, which I find to be very interesting. I didn't include it in my best decks for ranked video yesterday. Kind of disrespected it a little bit. I thought it would be fun. I thought it would be decent, but I didn't think it would be that good. We'll have to wait and see after the weeks go by if this deck continues to see play, if it has a decent enough win rate. Like I said, it is a single prize archetype, so if Oricorio becomes common, you know, this particular deck is not going to struggle with it whatsoever. And it's going to be really good against sort of those ramp decks. So if this deck also continues to see play, some of those slower ramp up decks are going to actually struggle against this archetype. I think that, of course, course, if Silvali's seeing a ton of play, it's going to struggle to some degree. There are some other fast-paced decks in the format, but this list is not a joke. It really is actually a strong deck list, and it's fun to see. In the official Pokemon TCG, we have decks like this sometimes. Sometimes they're good, but sometimes they're bad. These single prize archetypes are tough because you can't make them too strong because, of course, your opponent has to take 3 KOs, right? So that inherently does give the deck a little bit of an advantage. But as far as non-EX archetypes go, I think this is probably one of the better ones that's in the game right now. Unfortunately, Silvally still exists. In yesterday's video, we didn't talk about Silvally at all, and that's mainly because I just kind of left it out because I think we all know about the Silvally decks. They haven't changed much, and they're all really good. So I did mention them in yesterday's video, and of course, they're not new decks, so I'm not mentioning them in today's video. Maybe in tomorrow's updated decks video, we'll talk a little bit about Silvally, even though they haven't really changed much. They are pretty good options, and they are fairly simple decks to play, so keep that in mind. And there we go, guys. There's the video. There are a bunch of new awesome decks that are really strong, are doing well. We'll have to see if they really catch on. Even though they did make our list yesterday in yesterday's video, I think they're all really strong decks. And honestly, this is all mostly my opinions early on. I am basing things around like early metadata, but to be fair, we don't have a ton of that information yet. So after this weekend, we'll get definitely a good sample size in terms of which decks are doing well in a larger competitive setting, which should be interesting. So you're going to want to stay tuned on Meta Monday for us to kind of go over that. And then, of course, we'll do our tier list on Tuesday where we really put all our thoughts together. We crunch all of the numbers, all of the data, and then we rank all of the new decks in this format. I really can't wait. I think it's going to be kind of fun. I'm really excited about this format because there's tons of cards. There's a ton of different decks flying around, and ranked mode is definitely really fun right now for sure. So yeah, there we go, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned. I appreciate all of the support. More videos coming on the future. Eevee Grove, again, super fun. I'm having a great time with it. I really am. Okay, let's get out of here, guys. Peace out. Have a good weekend. And yeah, we'll see you guys later. Bye.